Okay, let's dive straight into this explainer. If you're a grad student, or honestly, even if you're a supervisor, you know the path to a high level degree is, well, it's rarely a straight line, right? It's literally fraught with psychological hurdles. Today, we're going to reframe that often painful postgraduate journey. We're going to look really closely at why the struggles you're facing might actually be a structural issue, rather than some kind of personal failing, and how we can actually transform that entire supervisor student dynamic. Before we really get into the weeds here, I want you to ask yourself a question. If you have ever felt like a fraud in academia, and let's be real, so many of us have, were you really lacking something, or was the system specifically designed to make you feel that way? We so often just internalize our struggles, you know? We think it's a sign we don't belong in the room. But as we're going to see, the environment itself plays a massive, often totally invisible role in manufacturing those exact feelings of self-doubt. So here is our roadmap for today. We're looking at 1. The doctoral metamorphosis, 2. Structural imposter syndrome, 3. The emotional labor toll, 4. Situational leadership styles, and finally, 5. Tools for inclusive supervision. All right, kicking things off with section 1, the doctoral metamorphosis. This concept elegantly defines the doctoral process. It's not just about passing your exams or, writing a massive thesis. It's actually a profound metamorphosis where your entire professional identity evolves. This is based on Jack Mesereau's transformational learning theory from 1991. The basic idea is that as you absorb all these new ideas and conduct research, your own interpretation of who you are fundamentally changes. You aren't just gaining knowledge. You are literally transforming from being an expert in a specific subject into a true scholar practitioner. It's this beautiful evolutionary process that completely reshapes how you view yourself. Moving right along to section 2, structural imposter syndrome. There is a fantastic quote from Feenstra and colleagues that I think completely validates the graduate experience. They argue that researchers need to consider how social and structural contexts create imposter feelings, rather than just treating it as an issue inside the individual. For decades, the focus has been solely on the psychological effects: low self-esteem, fear of isolation, mental health struggles. The real problem with that focus is that it places the entire burden squarely on you to just fix yourself. But this recent research emphasizes that systems of power, embedded gatekeeping, and highly competitive environments actually actively manufacture these feelings of fraudulence. We're actually seeing a really brilliant paradigm shift in higher ed research right now. Under the traditional view, if you felt like an imposter, you were basically told you had a psychological flaw. You're just a perfectionist, or maybe you just lack confidence. But the modern view, it recognizes imposterism as an institutional failure. I mean, think about it. When you have a hidden curriculum, those unspoken rules, the expectations that are never clearly defined, and this intensely comparative atmosphere, of course you're going to feel inadequate. You're essentially playing a high-stakes game where nobody bothered to give you the rule book. Acknowledging this reality is absolutely the first step toward genuine institutional inclusion. Let's flip the perspective in section 3, the emotional labor tool. Okay, so to be totally fair, we have to look at the folks sitting behind the desk too. When a supervisor seems distant, aloof, or maybe just unhelpful, it's rarely because they don't care. Usually, it's a complete lack of capacity. Supervisors carry this massive emotional labor toll. They're juggling incredibly busy schedules, a constantly growing number of supervisees, heavy lecturing duties, and, let's be honest, the true villain of academia, endless, mandatory administrative meetings. Research actually shows that this immense workload severely limits the time they genuinely have to sit down, guide, and effectively counsel postgrad students. So when structural demands drain a supervisor's emotional reserves, the mentorship relationship naturally takes a hit. That leaves the student feeling totally adrift, which then triggers that structural imposter syndrome we just talked about. It's a vicious cycle. So how do we fix it? Section 4, situational leadership styles. Instead of using a rigid one-size-fits-all approach, a really successful supervisor has to dynamically adapt their leadership style to whatever the student currently needs. Hersey and Blanchard laid this out beautifully in 4 steps. It starts with directing. So if a student has low skills or low motivation for a new task, you give them clear, highly specific instructions. Then, as the student gains some experience, the supervisor shifts to coaching, then to supporting, and finally, step 4 is delegating, where the student is operating with a high degree of independence. The whole concept hinges on constantly assessing the student's maturity, and by that, they mean the student's evolving knowledge, skills, and confidence. Doing this prevents micromanaging an advanced student, but it also ensures you aren't just abandoning a beginner.
And that brings us to Section 5, Tools for Inclusive Supervision.
One incredibly effective method that's been highlighted in a lot of recent studies is using visualization strategies. When supervisors use simple visual tools, roadmaps, or explicit models to literally map out the research journey, they strip away that hidden curriculum we talked about earlier. Making expectations incredibly clear and visually accessible means that students, regardless of their cultural or educational background, understand exactly what's required of them. It completely bridges the communication gap, and it fosters a much more responsive relationship.
Here is some actual real-world proof of these structural solutions in action. The University of Strathclyde Glasgow has implemented this really cool formal, written supervisory agreement for postgraduate researchers. Now, this isn't just a casual handshake. It is a concrete document that explicitly outlines the context, the values, the roles, and the responsibilities for both the student and the supervisory team. By legally and practically formalizing this relationship, institutions are actively removing the ambiguity that breeds imposter syndrome in the first place. Both parties know exactly what to expect right from day one. To really apply situational leadership effectively, this framework from the Department for Education shows us exactly how to align a student's needs with the supervisor's approach. So, for example, if a supervisee has low skills and experience, the leader defines the roles and uses a directing approach. Makes sense, right? But what if the student has good knowledge, yet they're really struggling with confidence, which is a classic symptom of imposter syndrome, by the way? Well, then the supervisor shifts to a coaching or supporting role. They start passing routine decisions back to the student to build up their self-efficacy without micromanaging them. The really important caveat here is that supervisors have to do this by objectively assessing the student. They have to check their own biases so they aren't making stereotypical assumptions based on things like gender, class, or educational background. To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this final thought. The academic journey absolutely does not have to be some kind of trial by fire fueled by structural anxiety and emotional burnout. Now that you're armed with the knowledge that these struggles are often totally systemic and that we have concrete frameworks like situational leadership and formal supervisory agreements to actually fix them, what practical steps are you going to take tomorrow? Whether you're a student who needs to demand clearer boundaries or you're a supervisor who needs to adjust your leadership style, how will you reshape your next academic relationship to foster a true metamorphosis? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and as always, keep learning.